I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of More Than Kurosawa. And this week, we're going to be looking at another 70s movie, this week 1971's Demons by the avant-garde filmmaker Toshio Matsumoto. In this movie, making a really dark, nihilistic, but expertly made and thoughtful story about greed and revenge. An awesome movie we're going to be covering about today. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about and celebrate a different movie, Asian movie, every single week from a different Asian director every single week. So we've been doing this now for a few months now, nearing the end of this series. So we've got a huge, awesome back catalog. You guys have been showing a lot of support for this series as well. So please do continue to comment below and let me know your thoughts if you've seen these movies. If you haven't, that great stuff is always well appreciated. But we do this to highlight the wide world of Asian cinema, that there's more than Akira Kurosawa or Bong Joon-ho, that there's a wide world of Asian cinema, and we're covering a great director literally every single week, and the movie is always, for me, a kind of good starting off point. If you haven't seen their movies, this may be a good opportunity to check out some of their other stuff. And how we kind of break these videos up is the first half, I talk about why I want to cover the filmmaker, because we cover a new one every single week, what makes them special, what are some of the other movies I've seen that I've also enjoyed. And then the second half of the video, doing a deep dive into the movie itself, what makes it special, what makes it different than some of the other movies we've covered, and how does it help us understand kind of the history of mostly East Asian cinema is the main goal of this series. But jumping into things, the discussion of why I want to really discuss Toshio Matsumoto. And that's because as we near the end of the series, I wanted to see what kinds of films and what kinds of eras we haven't covered. We've covered movies from the 50s, 60s, all the way up to the 2010s, and movies from different, countries of Vietnam or Japan or China or, so many different ones that we've covered so far. But looking back on our list, surprisingly, we've only covered one movie from the 70s, that being Vengeance is Mine from Shohei Imamura. So I figured let's go back to the 70s again, and I remembered a movie I saw called Demons about a year or two ago, really being impressed by it, but having not seen other of Matsumoto's other films. So for this video, went back, checked out Funeral Parade of Roses or Dogra Magra, or some of his kind of more experimental short films, and was really impressed by the variety of him as a filmmaker. Very different than Demons, but still an interesting filmmaker nonetheless. Still came back to Demons because I was so moved by it on that first experience, and even more so on rewatch as a real strong sign of a master. And then I was a little bit surprised at some of other Matsumoto's films, not because they were bad, but just because of how radically different they were. And I had a bit of a difficulty trying to understand what made him special. What was the kind of thematic linearity throughout his movies, and what made him unique, and what did he bring to exactly all of his movies. But I think if I were to describe one thing, it's always a desire to challenge. Because his career is so varied, I think he's interested in all different kinds of types of movies, but I would always describe them as a challenge or challenging. His later works, or even some of his earlier before this, something like Funeral Parade of Roses, are a little bit more experimental in their style. They're maybe more fitting in a museum piece than they are at a film festival. And if I were to compare him to any other director, it would be someone like a David Lynch. Or if you've seen David Lynch's movies, he's most well known for his kind of dreamlike experimental type movies like a Mulholland Drive or a Lost Highway. But he can also do great traditional movies like Straight Story. Yet when you think of David Lynch, you think of the Mulholland Drives. And I think with Matsumoto, I think when you think of him, probably most people think of Funeral Parade of Roses. Although he also has this movie in Demons, which is, I think, more of a straight story than it is a Mulholland Drive, if that makes sense. But regardless, is still a challenge to the users. Whereas something like Funeral Parade of Roses is challenging how we shoot movies in the form. Demons, for example, is challenging how we think of humans and their dark underbellies, and how brutal and nihilistic they can really be, and challenging how dark the human spirit can get. So I thought, interestingly, the two 70s movies we've covered, from Vengeance is Mine to Demons, in Japanese cinema in the 70s, very kind of dark and nihilistic, where we saw kind of post-World War II. The Japanese New Wave was cynical, yes, but there had some energy to it with the films of someone like a Kiyoshi Kurosawa or even a Nagase Oshima. But it's interesting how the 70s more develops into a more stable traditional period that mimics some of the earlier period, you'd say, like of the old masters like a Kurosawa or a Mizoguchi in the 50s, similar in form, but maybe a little bit even darker than those movies. And while Demons is pretty standard in its structure and how it's telling its story, there is some flashes of that non-linearity that Matsumoto is more familiar with in his other movies. So you can't talk about Matsumoto without talking about some of his experimental movies and his interest in kind of blending documentary and fiction. And he's definitely a filmmaker, when I think about him, of someone who's interested in how to change the way we see movies by changing its form. I don't think he always loves a traditional 3-act structure or plot or character in terms of going from one place to another. Most of his other movies, even his later stuff like Mogodagra, while they have linear stories, I think he's always trying to experiment with the form, whether that be inserting images, at seemingly random times, or kind of going from one place to another, like you're switching the channels on a TV, or he'll do like these kind of crash zooms later on in his work, which he became fond of. So Matsumoto, because he's such an experimental filmmaker, because he's so interested in the form, I think that makes him an innovative and exciting filmmaker. Like I said, they're a little bit more fitting in a museum piece, I would say, rather than a film festival, let's say, or in the theaters. That being said, that's just because of where his interest lies. It has nothing to do with him lacking the skill of a filmmaker, because you have a movie like Demons, which is more traditional and is an incredible version of that tradition. And I think his commonality is that desire to challenge the audience in many different ways, whether that be Demons, and it's more like a Mizoguchi movie in the style of that, or it's Funeral Parade of Roses or Oppmann, in which it's more experimental. It's maybe more the style of a Kiyoshi Kurosawa, another filmmaker that we've covered on this series. Fascinating filmmaker nonetheless, and did enjoy my time understanding his kind of more avant-garde movies that he made in the 60s and 70s for Japanese cinema. But transitioning now over into the discussion of the film, the movie we are covering today is that 1971's Demons, which is about a samurai who takes revenge on a man who betrayed the samurai's trust. It is a movie called Demons, but it's not necessarily a supernatural horror movie, more so a kind of folktale-esque story about revenge. And the first aspect that I was drawn to is how careful the framing is and just how beautiful and pretty the frame looks. In this movie, we have these kind of painterly type compositions. Oftentimes the camera is locked down, it's stable, there's not always a whole lot of movement to it. It's not a super slow movie like an Ozu movie, still entertaining, still interesting, but has a more of an old school way of limiting the camera movement, more interested in the blocking and how people kind of are framed within the frame itself. I think this is up there with a movie like The Godfather, released a year later, in its use of shadows and its use of black as a color. And we have so many instances where people, their faces are clear, but then the whole background is in black, or half their face, let's say, it is in black. And he definitely loves to play with the kind of black and white imagery there, and that use of light really kind of impressionistically, without it feeling otherworldly. Still feels kind of grounded, but there is an element of style that is just beautiful to look at and so well framed. And because it's so well framed, and because people are in such unique positions within the frame, it feels very considered. This is a very considered, well thought out movie that feels like you're in the hands of a master who is slowly revealing to you his story. And it's also one of these movies where you don't really understand it. You don't really understand the impact until the movie ends, and then you finally kind of understand and put together the pieces of what you've been seeing. And it's so well fitting for a movie that is about lies and manipulation and greed and kind of the deceivances that the human spirit will do to survive or to gain upper mobility or to trick people. There is a lot of complexity there. This is also a movie with an incredible ensemble cast. In particular, the son, played by Jiro Kara, or the samurai, played by Katsuo Nakamura. These two men are in a constant kind of battle of wits back and forth about kind of balancing on politeness and tradition and kind of that old school honor of a samurai of that kind of time in Japan, with their deepest desires to want to just kind of beat the crap out of each other or to air out their grievances. There is a fun kind of battle of wits between the two men, and they both play very different characters, but embody them so well. So part of the joy of this movie is also to see these two men act and kind of deceive each other throughout a scene, whether they know it or not. Like I mentioned earlier, Matsumoto will do some more experimental type of techniques within this movie where you're not always sure if what you're watching is what's happening or is a thought about what will happen if someone does something. You so oftentimes will see scenes play out 2 or 3 times in a row of the good version or the bad version of the heroic version, or different elements there. And this is not a traditional horror movie, like I mentioned, in the sense of a supernatural element. It is much more like an Onibaba in the folktale nature, but where a movie like Onibaba is more so about jealousy and how that will destroy someone, I think this movie is about greed and how that can destroy someone and the people around everyone. Like I mentioned, it's a nihilistic movie. It's a bit of a depraved movie, but it is so beautiful to look at because you feel like you're in the hands of master because of this really just beautiful painterly-esque compositions and beautiful use of shadows. Always makes for an engaging frame, mixed with some incredible performances, and a movie that is just this perfectly kind of placed structure, and it feels so contained. And like I said, once you get to the end of it, you'll kind of understand past motivations and you'll understand what Matsumoto is really trying to go for this movie. So while it's not a supernatural horror movie, it is about the horrors of the human spirit and is fascinating nonetheless. So we're getting into spooky season coming up. This is not a traditional type of a horror movie, but definitely one that will, I think, shake you to your core, as another example that when it comes to Asian cinema, there is more than Kurosawa. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on if you've seen Demons. It's relatively easy to look at, to get your hands on. So if you haven't seen this movie, it comes as a high recommend for me. Definitely a movie that I hadn't seen until much later, but feels like I can't imagine a life without it, because it is just feels like one of the great masters, one of the best Asian movies that I've ever seen. It has that kind of a weight and status as an all-time classic. So I definitely recommend you checking this one out. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.